My sister stood over the flames as my Air Force dress blues curled and blackened, the metal still pinned to the chest, melting into the fabric. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My legs refused to obey me as I watched my entire military identity disintegrate into ash in our mother's backyard. Melanie's expression wasn't anger or rage. It was satisfaction. Her lips curved slightly upward as she stepped back from the fire pit, arms crossed over her chest like she'd finally restored some kind of balance in her twisted mind. I had earned that medal, not just the ribbon or the pin or the ceremony. I had earned it with sweat, blood, and silence. The kind of silence that soldiers carry home with them. The kind that doesn't show up on discharge papers or official citations. But Melanie didn't see any of that. All she saw was me being recognized, me being praised, me being more than the shadow she tried to keep me in all my life. I remember the heat of the flames, the bitter smell of burning wool, and the way my fingers trembled at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tackle her. I wanted to claw at her face and demand why. But I did nothing. I just stared while the symbol of my service turned to smoke and drifted upward into a sky that used to make me feel safe. She said nothing when she turned around. No gloating words. No smug comments. Just that look. That terrifying calm that said this was only the beginning. And maybe it was. Because what Melanie didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly guessed, was that 2 weeks earlier I had found something in Grandpa's old storage cabinet. A flash drive. Just one. Labeled in his military handwriting. A name. A date. And one line underlined 3 times. If anything happens to me, this is for Rachel. That flash drive wasn't ordinary. It contained files encrypted so deeply I had to pull favors from 2 retired friends in cyber ops just to get the basics. Inside were documents with Department of Defense headers, scans of lab reports stamped classified, photos of men in suits standing in underground facilities. One of them was Melanie's boyfriend, the one she'd been bragging about for months. The one who funded her lifestyle and said he had friends in politics. Ron Maddox, congressman's aide, defense consultant, national security risk. I had found the kind of information people vanish over. Files that explain why men go missing or get framed or suddenly have mental breakdowns. I had no idea why Grandpa had them. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew one thing for sure. Melanie wasn't burning just my uniform. She was trying to erase me, destroy the one piece of identity I had left. But she was too late. I had already sent copies of those files to someone who knew exactly what to do with them. An old friend of Grandpa's, now an FBI agent. Melanie had crossed the line. And the moment she touched that metal, the moment she laughed at the sound of burning fabric, she signed her own downfall. She just didn't know it yet. Growing up in the Ward household was like trying to breathe underwater. Our mother, Linda, didn't believe in warmth. She believed in presentation. She believed in Melanie. My sister, 5 years older, was the golden child from the moment she exited the womb. She had straight teeth, perfect hair, and a smile that made people hand her things without question. I, on the other hand, was the accident. The second chance that no one really wanted. From the time I was old enough to walk, I was compared to her in everything. Melanie got trophies. I got detention slips. Melanie was prom queen. I was the quiet one in ROTC. When I told my mother I'd enlisted in the Air Force, she didn't even blink. She just said, "That makes sense. You never did like working with people. No pride, no emotion. Just a subtle jab wrapped in apathy." I left for basic training 2 weeks later with a duffel bag and no one waving goodbye. For years, I didn't look back. Military life gave me structure, purpose. It gave me something my family never did honor. But everything changed when I came back from Afghanistan with a fractured leg and a medal. I didn't ask for the Purple Heart. I didn't think I deserved it. The ambush had been brutal, fast, and messy, but I stayed on comms while pinned under rubble. I kept relaying coordinates. I kept others alive. When I got back stateside for rehab, they pinned it to my chest during a quiet ceremony on base. No one from my family came. I hadn't even told them, but someone must have found out. Because 3 weeks later, Mom called and asked if I'd really been shot or if it was just some accident you're milking. I should have hung up, but I didn't. I was still that girl looking for a shred of approval. I agreed to stay with her during physical therapy temporarily while I regained full mobility. That's how I ended up back under the roof I'd once escaped. Melanie still lived there now in the master bedroom. She'd taken over everything Mom's finances, daily decisions, even her prescriptions. She wore control like a tailored coat. I walked into my old room and found it empty. My posters, my books, my cot all gone. Replaced with dusty boxes labeled Rachel's Junk. The air was stale like the house had been holding its breath for years. At first, we played nice. Melanie made passive-aggressive comments about my free vacation courtesy of Uncle Sam. Mom chimed in with guilt trips about how hard Melanie has worked to take care of me while you ran off. I bit my tongue. I kept my head down. I focused on my rehab appointments and filled out paperwork for my medical discharge. But underneath the surface, something toxic was boiling. Melanie couldn't stand that I had returned with respect. She couldn't hide the flash of disdain in her eyes whenever someone from the neighborhood dropped off a casserole and thanked me for my service. She hated the way Mom's bridge club suddenly wanted to know more about me than her. And most of all, she hated the medal, the small velvet box that I kept in my backpack, the only item I hadn't unpacked. I never showed it off. I never mentioned it, but she knew it was there. I caught her once rifling through my closet pretending to look for extra towels. She froze when I walked in her hand half submerged in my bag. She smiled like it was nothing. But I saw the crack. I saw the rage hiding behind the gloss of her perfect exterior. The next morning, she made blueberry pancakes my favorite. The same kind she'd thrown on the floor the day I enlisted. Mom kept praising her for being so thoughtful. I just stared at the plate and realized something chilling. Melanie wasn't trying to be better. She was circling, waiting, calculating. Something in her had snapped the moment I walked through the door with a limp and a medal. And I knew then that I wasn't just unwelcome. I was a threat she planned to eliminate piece by piece. It didn't take long for Melanie's mask to slip. The first real crack came during dinner one night 2 weeks after I'd moved back in. I was quiet, still sore from therapy, while she bragged about Ron Maddox, her boyfriend, and how he was connected to real Washington people, not just local nobodies. I wasn't sure what that was supposed to mean, but when Mom chimed in with, "Maybe he can get Melanie a real job, something in communications," I understood. It was a jab carefully aimed, meant to remind me that whatever I'd done in the military, it didn't count in this house. I let it slide. I was used to this. But Melanie didn't stop there. She leaned across the table, stared me dead in the face, and said, "Did they give you that medal just for not dying?" The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't answer. I got up, limped to the sink, and started rinsing my plate. Behind me, I could hear her laugh under her breath. That became a pattern. Little comments, constant undermining. Mom didn't say much. Sometimes she chuckled. Sometimes she ignored it. But she never defended me. Not once. One afternoon, I overheard Melanie on the phone in the living room speaking low and fast. I stopped in the hallway just out of sight when I heard her say my name. She's acting weird, paranoid. I think she's hiding something. Yeah, I'll check her stuff again. My blood went cold. That night, I placed a small piece of thread over my backpack zipper. When I woke up, it was snapped. My things had been moved not carefully. My personal journal was left slightly open. The corner of the medals box was sticking out from under a pile of shirts I never folded that way. She was going through everything. When I confronted her casually during breakfast, she blinked slowly and smiled. "Why so jumpy? You didn't smuggle any enemy secrets home, did you?" Her tone was light teasing, but the words were sharp. I stopped eating. "Why are you in my room?" I asked. "Why do you care so much about what I brought home?" Melanie didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because you act like you're better than us now, like wearing a uniform makes you some kind of hero." "It doesn't. You're still just Rachel. The weird little girl who used to talk to herself in the garage." That one stung. More than I expected, because I had talked to myself back then when no one else listened, and she knew it. She knew every old wound and exactly where to press. Later that week, Mom announced at the dinner table that Melanie was being so generous in offering to help with my medical paperwork. I froze. What paperwork, I asked. Melanie answered for her. The discharge packet. The mental health section specifically. You've been forgetful, irritable, and you have a history of isolation. The VA needs to know the full picture, right? I pushed my chair back, heart pounding. That's not your decision. That's not your place. I'm just trying to help, she said sweetly. Soldiers with PTSD sometimes don't realize they're a danger to themselves. That was the first time I genuinely felt afraid, not physically, but existentially. Like she wasn't just trying to humiliate me anymore. She was trying to erase me, undermine my identity, discredit my voice, and Mom, as always, just sipped her tea, as if the world weren't shifting under our feet. The following morning, I found the hallway smoke detector dismantled. A small thing, maybe nothing, but it felt like a warning. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my door. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering when the next line would be crossed. Not if, when. I wasn't imagining it. Something was happening, and I needed to be ready. 3 days after the smoke detector incident, I decided to dig through the garage. It was the only space in the house Melanie hadn't completely claimed, mostly because it smelled like old oil and was packed with things from before she was born. While pretending to look for a heating pad Mom said she needed, I started sorting through Grandpa Walter's old cabinets. The dust was thick, the boxes brittle with age. He had been in the Air Force too, but no one ever talked about it. After he died, his belongings were shoved in here like they were too complicated to deal with. Most of what I found were yellowing flight logs, faded photographs, and tools rusted with time. But in a locked drawer under a pile of vintage maps, I found something unexpected. A military envelope taped to the bottom of the drawer. On it was Grandpa's handwriting, shaky but familiar. For Rachel, if anything happens to me. I hesitated before opening it. My pulse quickened. Inside, there was a flash drive wrapped in a piece of wax paper and a handwritten note. The note wasn't long, just a few lines scrawled in shaky cursive. If you found this, it means I couldn't finish it. Trust no one but Briggs. The files speak for themselves. Burn it all after. That name, Briggs, echoed in my brain. It sounded familiar. I remembered Grandpa mentioning an old friend from the Bureau, someone who once worked counter-intel during the Cold War. I pocketed the flash drive and note shoved everything else back and made sure the cabinet looked undisturbed. That night, I emailed one of my former comms instructors, Jackie, now working in cybersecurity. She owed me a favor. I didn't say much, just that I needed to crack some old encrypted files. She agreed and told me to send a copy, but I didn't trust any network in the house. So the next morning, I took a detour after physical therapy stopped at a library 2 towns over and uploaded the drive from a public terminal. The next day, Jackie called me back, her voice low and tense. "Where the hell did you get this?" "Rach," I asked what she meant. She didn't answer directly. "This stuff is stamped with old clearance levels, like mid-level DoD classified. It's about a project called Whispergate, bioweapon prototypes, unauthorized field tests. There are references to names I recognize, names that still show up in federal contract records." My stomach dropped. She continued. "One of the faces in the attached personnel files, Ron Maddox, as in your sister's Ron. And he's not just some analyst. He was listed as a regional field liaison. Whatever that means, it's not clean." I hung up and sat in my parked car, heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was bigger. I drove back in silence, rerunning everything Melanie had said over the past week. Her sudden obsession with my things, her weird calls, her constant surveillance. She was looking for this. Somehow she knew Grandpa had left something behind, and now she suspected I had it. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. I needed confirmation. That night, I logged into an old government personnel registry I still had limited access to and typed in the name Carter Briggs. He was real, retired bureau agent, counter-intel Cold War era, still listed as consulting on legacy decryption work. I found a public email associated with a security lecture he gave last year and sent him a message. Simple. Direct. "My name is Rachel Ward. Walter Ward was my grandfather. I found something I believe you were meant to see. Within 12 hours, he responded. The subject line read, "Meet in person." He gave me an address, a public park, no digital exchanges. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not my mom, not Melanie, especially not Melanie. The next day, I limped through the park clutching a manila envelope with a printout of the decrypted files and a backup drive. Carter Briggs looked exactly how I imagined, old, tall, and still sharp-eyed. He took one look at the envelope and said, "You have no idea what kind of storm you're walking into." I shook my head. "No, but I think my sister does, and that makes her dangerous." He nodded slowly, then took the envelope. "You're your grandfather's blood. We'll need to move carefully. This touches places you don't want to imagine." I didn't care. Whatever Melanie was involved in, whatever Ron had hidden, they weren't just hurting me. They were standing on something rotten. And I wasn't about to let them bury it. Not this time. Not ever. I returned home from the park with my mind buzzing and my limbs tense. The meeting with Carter had confirmed something deep in my gut. This wasn't just about sibling rivalry or a bitter family dynamic. It was about something much larger, and I was sitting on a powder keg that Melanie was desperate to extinguish. That night, I double-locked my door and slid a wedge under the handle just in case. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to break in. She waited for the right moment. The next morning, I woke up too late. My phone was dead, even though I'd left it charging. The hallway smelled like smoke. Panic rushed into my throat before I even opened the door. I limped as fast as I could to the back patio where I saw it. The fire pit was lit. My duffel bag was open. My Air Force dress blues, the metal box discharge paperwork, all of it were being fed to the flames. Melanie stood nearby with a metal poker in one hand, prodding the ashes like it was a Sunday barbecue. She didn't look up. Mom stood to the side, clutching a mug of coffee, eyes averted. I stumbled forward, my voice cracking. "What are you doing?" Melanie didn't flinch. "Cleaning up," she said simply. "You left a mess." I couldn't breathe. The fire hissed and popped, eating through wool and ribbon and the last remnants of my official identity. I rushed toward the pit, but Melanie stepped in front of me. "Don't be dramatic," she said, her voice calm. "It's just fabric and metal. You act like it matters." "It does matter," I said, my throat raw. "You had no right." She narrowed her eyes. "I have every right. This is my house, my family. You barge in here limping like some martyr expecting people to bow. You're not special, Rachel. You're just broken and looking for attention." The words hit harder than the smoke. I looked to Mom, hoping for something, anything, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, she muttered, "Melanie was just trying to help. You've been so tense lately." Tense. That's what they called it. Not alert, not recovering, just tense. Like I was the problem. Like Melanie lighting fire to my uniform was a reasonable household dispute. I turned back to the flames and watched the last edge of the metal case blacken and curl. "That was all I had," I said softly. Melanie shrugged. "You didn't need it. You were never going back anyway." And then she smiled, that cold, victorious smile. That's when I knew she wasn't acting out of impulse. This was planned, deliberate. She'd gone through my things, found the symbolic items, and destroyed them to send a message. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I'd already backed up everything. The flash drive, the documents, the photos, the connection to Ron. I still had my leverage, but I said nothing. I walked back inside, ignoring the smell of burning memories. My legs trembled with rage, but I forced myself to sit calmly at the kitchen table. Melanie followed a minute later and dropped a folded brochure in front of me. A wellness center, a place for female veterans to decompress. I picked it up, read the tagline, and looked at her. "What is this?" "An option," she said smoothly. "You're obviously not adjusting well. You're paranoid, isolating. You barely sleep. Mom and I talked, and we think it might help. You're trying to get me committed." She leaned in close. "If you don't start behaving, I won't have to try very hard." My fingers clenched around the brochure. Every muscle in my body screamed to retaliate, but instead I nodded. Slowly. "Thank you for the concern," I said. Then I smiled back, and that terrified her more than if I'd screamed, because I wasn't broken. I was calculating, and she had just made a very serious mistake. 2 days after the fire, I left the house at 5 a.m. without telling anyone. I didn't pack a bag, I didn't limp, I didn't look back. I walked to the bus stop and headed 2 towns over to a diner with thick windows and old-fashioned booths, the kind where no one asked questions, and the coffee was always burnt. Carter was already there when I arrived, seated in the back with a black folder in front of him and 2 mugs between us. He didn't smile, didn't waste time. "You're being watched," he said plainly. "We've intercepted chatter. You've triggered something." I nodded slowly, hands wrapped around the mug, even though it was too hot. "I figured." He opened the folder. "What you found, Whispergate, is more than just buried research. It's a thread that connects to people who never wanted their names spoken again. Your sister's boyfriend, Ron Maddox, appears in internal documentation not as a civilian, but as a liaison. He was part of the regional containment team that oversaw field trials, unauthorized, illegal field trials. If that gets out, careers die. People panic. We're already seeing quiet moves, data being wiped, access logs vanishing. Someone's scared." "Melanie," I asked. "No," Carter said. "She's not scared. She's just useful. She's being handled, possibly incentivized to keep you monitored, discredited, or pushed aside. We've seen it before. Discredit the messenger, bury the message." I sat back, heart pounding. They're trying to make me look unstable. She already handed me a brochure for a wellness center. Carter's eyes darkened. Classic. Those places operate in legal gray zones. One doctor's signature, and they can keep you for observation indefinitely. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Good. Then listen carefully. We're moving to build a case, but we can't act without irrefutable proof. We need something that shows not only the existence of Whispergate, but intentional continuation after the shutdown orders. A specific file codenamed Calyx 8. Your grandfather referenced it in his final decrypted message, but we haven't found the document. Any chance it's still in the house?" I paused, trying to remember everything I saw in the garage. The hidden cabinet, the false bottom under the map drawer. There had been a second metal tin I didn't open because it was rusted shut. "Maybe," I said. Carter nodded. "Get it. But move smart. You're on their radar now. Any sudden move might trigger containment." I left the diner without finishing my coffee. The air outside was cold, slicing through my jacket like needles. I took the long route home, circling the block twice, noting a sedan parked 2 houses down that hadn't been there before. The driver never looked up. Inside the house, everything felt different. Melanie was cheerful, too cheerful. She had cleaned the kitchen, folded my laundry, even left a tray of tea in my room. I didn't touch it. I waited until midnight. Then I crept out to the garage with a flashlight and a pry bar. My heart thudded with every creak of the floorboards. I moved boxes with surgical precision, aware that anything out of place could tip her off. The second tin was still there, wedged behind a stack of forgotten paint cans. I popped it open. Inside, I found 2 things: a sealed envelope with my name on it and a heavily creased folder marked C8. I didn't open either. I just shoved them into my jacket and slipped back inside, breath shallow. Back in my room, I locked the door and sat on the floor, trembling. I opened the envelope first. Grandpa's handwriting again. Just 1 sentence. "Calyx 8 is the key. Protect it." I hid the folder inside a hollowed-out law textbook and slid it under my bed. The next morning, I emailed Carter from a public library terminal, no return address, using a fresh burner email. Subject: I have it. Within hours, he replied, "Hold tight, we're preparing extraction." That afternoon, Melanie knocked on my door and said, "We're having dinner out tonight. Ron's treating. He wants to celebrate something. Said it's good news for everyone." I didn't respond. I just smiled, because I already knew what he was celebrating, his last week of freedom, and I was going to make sure it ended in handcuffs. The dinner that night was a show. Ron wore a crisp blazer, Melanie was in a red dress she usually reserved for weddings, and Mom had on pearls I didn't know she still owned. We went to some overpriced steakhouse where Ron ordered for everyone and spoke like he was at a press conference. "Big things are coming," he said with a wink. "Major opportunities. But we have to keep certain elements quiet, of course. Discretion is everything." His eyes flicked to me when he said it. I didn't react. I cut my steak knotted occasionally and kept my expression neutral, but underneath my mind was racing. I knew what this was, a victory lap. He thought he had silenced me, that whatever leverage I had was gone. Melanie kept looking at me like she was trying to read my thoughts, but she wasn't smart enough to know that I'd already handed off the real weapon. Calyx 8 was in Carter's hands now. What happened next wasn't up to me. I just had to survive until it detonated. The next morning, I woke up to find my room spotless. My clothes folded, my drawers reorganized, my hollowed-out book gone. Panic clamped around my throat. I tore through the room, trying not to make noise, heart pounding so loud it hurt. The book was in the trash, empty. The folder was gone. I ran downstairs trying to stay calm, but Melanie was already there, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She looked up. Looking for something, I stared at her fury bubbling up. "Where is it?" "Where's what?" she asked innocently. "You mean the stack of nonsense you had hidden in a fake book I gave it to Ron. He said he'd pass it along to someone who could help you. You've been under so much stress." My hands clenched. "That wasn't yours." She stood slowly. "Nothing in this house is yours. Not anymore." An hour later, a van pulled into the driveway. Clean white exterior, unmarked. Two men got out wearing polos and khakis, harmless on the surface, but their movements were practiced, professional. Mom came to my room and said it gently like she was offering me soup. "They just want to talk to you, honey. Help you get back on track. Melanie says you've been very paranoid." I stood frozen. "You're sending me away. It's not permanent," she insisted. "It's for your own good." I heard Ron downstairs laughing with the men, shaking hands. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about care. This was extraction. Institutionalization under the guise of concern. A soft prison, no phones, no lawyers, no Carter, no Calyx 8. They were trying to disappear me. I had one chance. While Mom went to sign paperwork in the kitchen, I told the men I needed to change. One of them followed me halfway down the hall, then paused at the top of the stairs. That was their mistake. I shut the door. Locked, it yanked open the window and dropped to the garden below. Pain exploded in my ankle, but I didn't stop. I limped into the alley through 2 yards and onto a side street where I flagged a landscaper's truck and offered him $100 for a ride to the public library. He didn't ask questions, just pointed to the back and told me to duck. At the library, I emailed Carter. Subject line, "They tried." I lost the physical copy. "Do you have it?" He replied in minutes. "Already duplicated. They didn't get anything. Meet me tonight. Same place." New plan. I exhaled for the first time in hours. I hadn't lost the game. Not yet. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in a motel paid with cash, hiding under a different name. I watched the news. Nothing yet. No arrests. No leaks. But I knew it was coming. They had tried to erase me. They had used family fake doctors and polite van rides to crush the truth. But I had survived. Again. And now it was my turn. The invitation came 3 days later. A formal printed card slid under my motel room door with no return address, just my name in bold Sergeant Rachel Ward. It was from the city council co-hosting an annual ceremony honoring women veterans. My name was on the program, guest of honor, opening remarks. They wanted me to speak. I didn't know how they found me. I didn't care. All I knew was that this event was being sponsored in part by Ron Maddox's PAC. I knew it because Melanie mentioned it once with pride, how Ron was finally getting recognition as a community builder. That ceremony would be full of reporters, politicians, donors, and cameras. It was the perfect stage. Carter agreed. We met in a dark parking garage the night before, our voices low and tight. He handed me a flash drive and a simple remote. "The projector system is already patched. Just click the red button when you're ready. The footage will go live to all press feeds. There's no stopping it once it starts." I nodded. "What happens after?" "There will be noise," Carter said. "Your sister and Maddox will do damage control, legal threats, media spin. But the content is time-stamped, encrypted, and cross-referenced. It won't vanish. It's already been sent to the Oversight Committee. And once the public sees it, no one will be able to bury this again. I barely slept that night. My hands shook when I dressed. I wore a loaned Air Force blazer that didn't quite fit. No medal, no dress blues. Just the weight of what they'd taken from me and what I was about to take back. When I arrived at the hall, Melanie was already there. She wore white like a saint, her hair styled her smile perfect. Ron stood beside her shaking hands with local officials like he belonged there. When he saw me, he froze, just for a second. But I saw the calculation. He wasn't afraid. He was assessing risk. Melanie walked over, a champagne flute in hand, voice soft and cruel. "Didn't expect you to show. Brave of you." I stared at her. It's amazing what a little rest and clarity can do. "Still clinging to delusions, I see," she said. "You're not a threat, Rachel. You're a headline waiting to be forgotten." "We'll see," I said, and walked away. I took my seat on stage behind the podium, watching as the room filled. Camera crews adjusted lighting, reporters whispered. The mayor stood to make opening remarks. Then Ron approached the microphone. Today, he began, "We honor the bravery of women in uniform. Women like my partner's sister, Sergeant Rachel Ward, who returned home after serving overseas with distinction. We applaud her sacrifice." Applause followed. Melanie beamed. I kept my eyes down. Then the mayor called my name. And now a few words from Sergeant Ward herself. I walked up slowly, knees aching, palms damp. I stared out at the sea of faces, some smiling politely, some bored, some curious. I didn't speak at first. I just breathed. Then I said, "Thank you for being here today. I was told I could speak freely, that this was a space for truth. So I'm going to share something real." I reached into my pocket and clicked the red button. The screen behind me lit up. Silence fell. A video began to play. Security footage, a hallway in an underground facility. Date stamped 15 years ago. A younger Ron Maddox walking with a clipboard past a row of locked doors. Voiceover audio followed. It was Maddox's voice from a later briefing. "Calyx 8 is stable in high-density populations. The side effects are manageable if dosed properly. No paper trail, no oversight." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then came internal memos stamped classified detailing unauthorized field tests, signed by Maddox, cross-referenced with names still in office. A reporter stood up. Another began filming the screen directly. Melanie turned pale. Ron stepped forward, shouting, "This is slander! It's fake! She's mentally unwell!" Carter appeared from the side of the stage, flanked by 2 federal agents. He held up a hand. "We have verified all documents and sources. Multiple agencies have been informed. This is now a federal matter." Melanie screamed, literally screamed. "She's lying!" "She forged everything." Carter ignored her. The agents moved to Ron, who backed away, sputtering. "You can't do this. I have clearance." "I know people." They cuffed him. Read his rights. Took his phone. Cameras caught every second. Then Carter looked at Melanie. "We have evidence of obstruction and destruction of federal property. You'll be coming with us." "I'm her sister," Melanie shrieked. "She's unstable. You can't believe her." "We do," Carter said simply. "And so does the footage." She lunged toward me. Security caught her mid-stride. Her hair fell from its clip, her heels scraping across the floor as they dragged her away. I stood, frozen. People stared at me stunned. Some clapped, others just watched. I stepped back from the microphone. "I didn't want this," I said quietly. But sometimes the only way to heal is to expose the wound. Then I walked off stage while the room erupted behind me. My sister's voice faded behind me, replaced by flashbulbs and shouting. The past was on fire, but this time I wasn't the one burning. By the following morning, every major outlet had picked up the footage. My face was on the news not as a victim or a paranoid vet, but as a whistleblower. MSNBC ran a banner that read, "Veteran exposes illegal military trials. Congress demands inquiry." Fox News focused on Ron's arrest and the corruption angle. Social media exploded. I trended for 2 days straight. Rachel Ward, Calyx 8, Whispergate. I barely left the motel room. Carter warned me to lay low while the legal teams sorted everything out. He texted updates every few hours. Ron had been denied bail. He was being held in a federal facility and already trying to cut a deal. Melanie was under psychiatric evaluation, not at a wellness center this time, at a real federal holding unit under suspicion of tampering with classified evidence and aiding a fugitive. Mom didn't call. She didn't email. Nothing. I didn't know whether to be relieved or shattered. I spent hours staring at the TV watching the same loop of my speech, the agents cuffing Ron, the crowd's stunned faces. Then came the part that gutted me, an old clip they dug up of me in uniform saluting during a change of command. I looked young, sharp, proud, and I realized I hadn't seen that woman in the mirror for years. Reporters began camping outside my motel. Carter arranged for a temporary safe house through the VA, and I moved again. Clean sheets, quiet, just enough time to breathe. Then the hearings started. I wasn't called to testify immediately, but I was deposed for hours behind closed doors. Lawyers asked about every document, every interaction, every memory. I answered everything. I didn't hold back. Carter said my testimony would be critical. "You're not just a witness," he said. "You're the thread that unraveled everything." Meanwhile, Ron's empire collapsed. His PAC was dissolved. Board members resigned in shame. Contractors disavowed any knowledge of Whispergate. Donors ran. His house was seized, his assets frozen. And Melanie, my sister, made headlines of her own. Veteran sister burned her uniform in cover-up attempt, read one headline. Family betrayal at the core of national scandal, said another. They used our family photo, the one from when we were kids. She looked angelic. I looked awkward. Underneath a caption read, "Sisters torn apart by the truth." I shut off the TV. I didn't want their narrative. I wanted peace. But peace didn't come easy. I still woke up some nights sweating, gasping. The image of my uniform in flames wouldn't leave me. The smell of smoke, the sting of betrayal, the cold silence of my mother's face. One day, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a letter from a woman named Sandra, a military wife from Colorado. She wrote, "My husband died in a test area connected to Whispergate. No one would tell me why. I thought I was crazy. You made me feel sane. Thank you." I cried reading it. Not out of grief, but out of validation. I wasn't alone. I had made the silence break. Weeks later, Congress formally launched an oversight committee. Subpoenas flew. Names fell. Carter called me one evening and said, "You changed more than you know." I didn't respond. I just looked out the window at the setting sun. I had nothing left of my old life. No home, no family, no uniform. But I had the truth, and I had my voice. And for once, that was enough. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small building in my hometown. It wasn't much, just red brick, 2 stories, a modest plaque on the door, but it was mine. On the plaque, the Rachel Ward Foundation, Justice for Veterans and Whistleblowers. The funding came from a settlement agreement Congress quietly approved after the hearings. Carter had handled the logistics. I handled the mission. Inside, we had 3 caseworkers, a legal aide, and a trauma counselor, all trained to help those who had been silenced, discredited, or manipulated after their service. And every Friday, we hosted a support circle for women vets. Some nights were quiet, others were raw, but they always ended with someone saying, "I didn't think anyone would understand." That was all I ever needed to hear. Melanie never reached out again. Last I heard, she had accepted a plea deal to avoid federal prison, agreeing to testify against Ron and forfeit all assets tied to the cover-up. Her name was toxic now. Employers Googled her and ran. Her friends vanished. Our mother moved to Florida. I never heard from her again. I didn't look for closure. I learned that sometimes justice is the only closure you get. But one letter changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday in a navy envelope with perfect handwriting. No return address. Inside was a note from Grandpa, dated 3 years before his death. "Rachel," it read, "if you're reading this, then I trust you found the truth. You always had the fire in you. I'm sorry for the burden, but I saw what they did and I couldn't stay silent. I knew you'd finish what I couldn't. You were always the one." I sat with that letter for a long time, pressing it to my chest. He had seen me, known me, believed in me, even when no one else had. One evening after our support circle ended, a young woman lingered behind. Her name was Erin. She was barely 22, newly discharged after reporting her superior for harassment and being labeled unstable in retaliation. She had nowhere to go. I walked her to the small apartment above the foundation temporary housing for vets like her and gave her a key. "You're safe here," I told her. She burst into tears. Later that night, I walked the empty hallway and paused by the shadow box we'd hung on the wall. Inside was my replacement uniform, one we'd recreated down to the exact details. The ribbons, the name tag, the patch. Not burned, not hidden. Framed in honor. Next to it was a simple brass plate. She refused to be silenced. Some days I still felt the echoes of that fire. I'd smell smoke that wasn't there. Wake from dreams where Melanie's laughter followed me down burning halls. But then I'd walk into the office, see Aaron helping another survivor hear someone on the phone offering hope instead of denial, and I'd remember. The story didn't end in the fire. It began there. In the ashes, I built something better, and I wasn't alone. On the 1-year anniversary of the ceremony, I was invited to speak again, this time at the National Women in Service Memorial in D.C. I wore my blazer. Carter stood in the crowd. When I stepped up to the podium, I looked out and said, "Some of us come home to silence. Some of us come home to war that never ends. But if you're hearing this, know that your voice matters. That truth is louder than fear, and that you are never alone." The crowd rose in applause, not for the scandal, not for the headlines, but for the woman who had once stood in fire and refused to burn. Me, Rachel Ward, not a victim, not a pawn, a soldier, a survivor, and now a leader.